Welcome to the Bible Made Clear. So, we have been walking through the book of Revelation, doing kind of really an overview or some highlights just to get an idea. I think that obviously the book requires much more in-depth study to grasp some of the more fine points regarding it, but we have come now to since we did the bowl judgments last time. Now we have come to the judgment of religious Babylon in chapter 17. So let's just take a look at some of what we learned from there. Now, chapter 17 provides the judgment of what we are calling religious Babylon. And we'll see why it's called religious Babylon in a moment. So there's a woman here. Let's take a quick look at Esword, and so we can see the text. And it says, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls, came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. I mean, it sounds pretty nasty so far just by the description. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. So that's up through verse 6. So let's take a look here because the woman is identified. Um, Guzik says Mystery Babylon the Great. This title is not for literal Babylon, but it's spiritual or mystery representation, which is the source of the mother of all idolatry, abominations, and spiritual adultery. That's where the word harlots comes in. This harlot must be larger than any one branch of a religious institution. In other words, it's not just a denomination, it's not just like one group of people. After the rapture, you're going to have all the false religions, the major ones, anyways, come together. And that's what's going to make this up because they have been the deceivers of mankind from the Tower of Babel with Nimrod back in Genesis chapter 11 when he was building a tower, a ziggurat, to worship the heavens and idolatry, the zodiac. And in that system was created. Um, a priesthood, sacrifices. There was a whole setup of false idolatry. In rebellion against God, God wanted people to spread out and multiply. Nimrod kept them in close, everybody was unified, and God broke it up. Now, that historically, and we get even much of that outside the Bible, that historically has been the source of really virtually all the false religious systems in the world. And so it comes to its full development here in the judgment against this harlot. So um, the mystery Babylon is certainly the religious aspect of it, because the religion is not grounded in one particular religious institution. It's a combination. Now, certainly there may be a headquarters, and no doubt about that, but the idea is that there is um, it is a mystery religion in a sense, as opposed to um, just one kind of church group or whatever. But anyways, it says in the middle of the paragraph, she is the embodiment of Satan's own ecumenical movement, the religion of the world system. And that's probably the best way to say that. Our world with it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you believe, philosophy is ripe for the harlot's seductions. We see the casual disregard for the truth crippling the church today. And um, that couldn't be more true. I just got done talking to a high school Bible class, and the problem that we face, the reason that so much of the American church, the Christian church, is so easily deceived and taken by, like Paul says in Ephesians 4, um, winds of doctrines, by the sleight and cunning craftiness of men wherein by they lie in wait to deceive. I mean, he tells us that. But people are deceived because they do not know the Word of God. They are word poor, or, um, a more crass phrase would be Bible stupid. They just don't know their Bibles. If you don't know the Word of God, of course you're going to be easily deceived. You can't just rely on, um, a questionnaire. So many Christians end up asking other Christians when they learn something. They say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" Or "What do you think about this?" Or "What do you think?" And they get, they do like a survey, and then they come to their knowledge or understanding of what's true based on their friends' viewpoints, or like a survey, or they watch, something like this, like a YouTube channel or something, or Rumble channel or some other channel or some social media podcast where people are talking, and hey, uh, I could be way off, you know. Now, I think if you've listened to me long enough, you realize my approach to the Bible, and as well as everything else. So you have decided whether you want to follow this, and that's up to you. However, you can't just kind of latch on to somebody that you don't know because they're talking Bible stuff, or they say something that seems really interesting, and then say, "Wow, that must be true," or "I'd like that to be true," or, in other words, we have to go through the Bible for ourselves. There is a ton of good, solid, commentaries and Bible helps out there. Um, you know, uh, I can, I have recommended. I did um, a number of videos on eSword, and tried to show you how that worked. Unfortunately, some of the things that I was doing didn't show up on the screen, and I realized that. But you certainly get the basis of what's going on, and I also, I talk about different commentaries and stuff like that. Solid ones. I can send you a list if you want. But the point is that, um, that's free. eSword is free, and you know, uh, many of the resources that you can get for it, they're all free. There's really no reason for us to sit in ignorance of what the Bible teaches, and we need to become self-feeders. We can't always have somebody spoon feeding us like little babies, hoping that they give us good food. But if they don't, if they mix a little arsenic in with it, we get sick and we don't know why. The same thing happens spiritually in our lives. I mean, so many people are just, and I say people as people in the Christian church in America, they just so easily gravitate towards the sensational, or, things that are um, just like really nice cinematic um, presentations. And the problem is we've come to a place in our world where people are evaluating the truth of something based on how it's presented, not what is presented. So basically, if you can wrap lies, or a mixture of lies, and the truth in with a great presentation, people are going to take it in, hook, line, and sinker. However, if you don't have a great presentation, but you're telling people the truth, Well, people tend to disregard that because we live in this kind of video crazed generation where if it looks good or if it's exciting or, if you get all these, quick flashes, then I'll watch it. But if it's just kind of, requires any measure of patience and learning and diligence and serious thought, I'm not in it for that. And this is part of the problem. When I grew up, when I was a little kid in the 60s, Sesame Street was the thing that, we watched as little kids. That kind of came into fruition. And, Sesame Street developed over the years where they got kids, to pay attention by changing the image on the screen every so many seconds. That they realized that if they didn't keep changing it, then kids would lose interest. And so they couldn't teach them. Now, the problem is that developed into a whole cultural means of learning. And, uh, so now if if you don't have like this constant movement and excitement and everything in like certain movies and all this other stuff, like people won't watch it. um I had somebody in the office here the other day tell me that the reason that kids won't watch stuff like the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, if you even know what that is because it's too slow. Like, like the story isn't enough for them. They need to have like quicker movement and all this stuff. But the problem is, you need to be able to watch something, you know, regardless of what it is, and you have to be able to develop thought. And that doesn't happen in, you know, t like a change in scene every 10 seconds. You don't have a chance to think because um, the next image is shot in every few seconds to kind of keep your mind awake. It's like, oh, another, and but that's not necessarily learning. And we need to think Christians should be really the most thoughtful people in the world, and unfortunately, far too many of them um, are disregarding the truth, and it is crippling the church today. But, anyways, I'll get off that and move along. So the woman has a connection with the beast. She rides the beast, which is evidence of control over him. She ends The control ends when the beast is done with her. We see that in verse 16. So let's take a quick look here. Now, we ended off at verse 6. Let's see. Um, in verse 7, it says, "But the angel said to me, why do you marvel?" In other words, with all at this whole thing and the deception and everything. "I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns." So they're letting you know it's the one from Revelation 13, that beast. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. Well, so we know the beast is not good, right? The beast is coming in from hell. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Now, unfortunately, um, so here in verse 9, it says 7 mountains in the New King James. In the Old King James, um, it also says 7 mountains. Sometimes it's translated 7 hills, or people make it into 7 hills. So not 7 hills, it's 7 mountains. Um, Verse 10, there are also 7 kings, 5 have fallen, one is, the other is not yet come, and when he is come, he must continue for a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going into perdition. Um, the 10 horns, which you saw, are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast, short lived. Uh, these are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast, so they're in full support of him. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he, meaning Jesus, is Lord of lords, King of kings, and those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw, so we've gone from the woman to the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So it tells us what the waters are. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. So there's a point of rejection there. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and to give her their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So back here, the control ends, verse 16, when the beast is done with this religious system. Once his power has been consolidated, the Antichrist no longer needs the help of religious Babylon. He will then work to dismantle and destroy her and her one world religion. So he's not looking for any rivals here. He'll use, just like Satan, uses whoever he can, whoever he needs to gain whatever measure of control he is trying to achieve at the time. And he just chews them up and spits them out when he has no more need for them. You see this with celebrities all the time. Some of these celebrities, they get involved in all this stardom and everything, and people are looking at them and start to glorify them. And then as soon as they start to receive some glory, Satan's done with them, and it's like, nope, I'm taking that glory, and then he just casts them off and goes on to the next one, and it's on and on and on. Um, None of that is of any permanence. It's as fleeting as you can get. So the mountains, what are they in verse 9? Well, the 7 heads are 7 mountains. Many quickly associate the 7 mountains with Rome and the papacy because Rome is well known as a city on 7 hills. Yet, literally, the Greek word means mountains, not hills, which is why I show you it was translated like that. Not hills in the Bible. Mountains are sometimes a figure of governments, and the city of Rome is built on hills, not mountains. So, again, um, though Rome is certainly going to have a place in this final um, Antichrist government. Uh, it's what it's not saying is the 7 heads are the 7 mountains. We'll get into that a little more. We go on here. Constable says Revelation 17:9 and 9 through 11 are an exposition or clarification of Revelation 17:8. The text is always its own best interpreter. So again, what is 17:8? 17:8 says, um, the beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. Those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of the life of the Lamb from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was, is not, and yet is. So now he goes on to say the 7 heads are 7 kings, Revelation 17:10. They are the heads and personifications of 7 empires. Okay, so the 7 empires are going to be connected with the 7 mountains, which is really talking governments or governmental powers, right? So the angel also referred to them as mountains, 17:9. In the Bible, a mountain is sometimes a symbol of a prominent government, and then you have a number of references there from Psalm 30 to Zechariah 4:7. Zechariah 4:7 is pretty familiar to us. The message was when they were rebuilding the temple to Zerubbabel, to speak grace, grace to the mountain. Well, there were governments trying to prevent the Jews from completing their temple. It had sat dormant for 14 years after they got back from Babylon, and they had laid the foundation but had not done anything else. So God raised up Haggai and Zechariah to tell them to kick it into gear and start, complete the building, because that was the central aspect of the nation of Israel in their spiritual life, was the temple, and they didn't have one in order to focus their ritual of worship around. So the seven kings, who are they? Verse 10. Again, Guzik says some explain these seven kings, five past, one present, one to come in the succession of Roman emperors in John's era. But there are many historical difficulties with this approach. More likely, it is a reference to five have fallen, refers to the five world empires, right? Egypt, um, Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome, right? Before John's day, I'm sorry, Assyria was in there. Egypt, Assyria, Babylonia, Media, Persia, and Greece. One is, which would be Rome, the world empire of John's day. The other has not yet come, refers to the one empire to come, a revival of the Roman Empire. That's the 10 toes. When it comes, he must continue for a short time. The seventh will quickly be taken over by an eighth and will become the state of the Antichrist, the development of the 10 toes. The beast, or the Antichrist, is clearly identified as the eighth king. He himself, also the eighth, he is of the seven in the sense that he shares characteristics with all previous world empires, but he is not them. He is his own um, governing power. The beast not only has seven heads, but he himself is the eighth. He is of the seven, that is, he belongs to the same Babylonian world system that preceded him, even though he's not part of those seven. So, in that way, you have the differentiation, and that's a quote from the Complete Biblical Library. All right, the waters, what are they? Verse 15. Well, water is a common symbol for people in the Old Testament. You have those references. The harlot exercises a controlling influence over the population of the world, both the faithful and the rebellious. And again, you have the references, you can look those up. There will be one religious system that will encompass all nations and peoples during the tribulation, though there could be various local forms of it. So, even this one world religion may have some varied nuances in general localities that are, often different areas of the world, um, not necessarily denominational splits, but variations, whatever it needs to meet for that area, because there are going to be cultural differences as we see around the world today, even some of the different religions. But there has to be a way to blend them together, but allow them to keep their pluralism. John now clearly identified the symbolism of the waters where the great whore or harlot woman sat. They are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. That is, they're all the people of the world. That's pretty clear from the text, right? They are. They have all been influenced through the centuries by these false religious systems that will culminate in the state religion of the Antichrist. They have all been part of the Babylonian world system, represented by the image with the head of gold in Daniel chapter 2 and by the sequence of the four wild beasts in Daniel 7. Those still existing in the end of the age will become part of the Antichrist kingdom. So Daniel 2 has the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, and he saw the world in this image, right, the head of gold, chest and arms of silver, stomach and thighs of brass, and the legs and feet uh, of iron and clay. And they, that's kind of man's view with the dream. And then Daniel chapter 7, he has a vision and he sees them as four animals. So they have just you know the 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 different listing of animals, um, and so the fourth one really just kind of a conglomeration of the previous three. But those are the four major world governing empires uh, from that era on. What happens to the woman? Verses 16 and 17. Well, once his power has been consolidated, the Antichrist no longer needs the help of religious Babylon. He will then work to dismantle and destroy her and her one world religion. This has always been the goal of tyrants and most politicians, to use religion for their purposes and then discard it. So we see this throughout world history. Um, you know, many world tyrants and even many politicians that may not be considered tyrants use religion in one form or another to gain credibility. They gain votes. They appeal to the religious aspects of things, and um, but once they have the power, then they don't need them anymore. They just kind of cast them aside, which is really what the beast is going to do. Now, God has directed the judgment against religious Babylon. God will sometimes use a wicked group, here the 10 kings, to be an instrument of his judgment against another wicked group, here religious Babylon. God has ordained the political support of these 10 kings for the Antichrist. In doing so, God gives the world exactly what it wants: godless religion and godless rulers. You know, as you go back into the history of Israel, that's what God gave Israel when they wanted a king, not just a king, they wanted a king like the other nations. So God gave them Saul. Saul looked the part. He was head and shoulders above the rest. He was handsome. He came from a good family. He had good pedigree, right? So he had everything on the outside, and he was a large man, but on the inside he was a small man. Saul needed to have the praise of the horizontal in people, um, because he was insecure. Insecure people need other people to constantly tell them, how wonderful they are and support them. And if they don't get it, they get paranoid, you know. So the God eventually chooses David. David's a man after God's heart. He never was into idolatry or anything else. He certainly had his flaws, no doubt, but he was still uh, a great king for the nation, even with his flaws. But going back to Saul, um, I mean, if you go through Saul's life, Saul is a frightening example of a leader, but yet um, he so correlates to so many leaders we see in the world today. Saul played a role. He didn't want anybody else to get credit for anything. When finally David became his captain and they would go out to battle and they would come back, and the song was, Saul slayed his thousands, but David slayed his tens of thousands. That infuriated Saul. And he sought to kill David. I mean, this is what insecure people do. Insecure people need to ruin everybody else around them so they're the only ones standing. So when the dust settles, there's nobody else. In other words, they can't really handle competition. They don't want competition. They're so empty. They need the fleeting praises of people that, for the most part, may not even do it genuinely, but at least they're saying the words and they feel like there's something. That is the worst characteristic of leadership that you can have because it will ruin the people, the very people that they're supposed to be tasked with presiding over to enhance their lives. They actually ruin their lives. And that's why out in the wilderness, um, David went to the cave of Adullam and he started out with, anyways, 400 men that were discontent, in debt, and distressed. Why? Because of Saul's reign. Saul was such a terrible ruler um, that he oppressed everybody. Everybody was miserable. They were afraid of him. Um, when God moved the anointing of the Spirit for the position from him to David, because he was really usurping the position after that, he knew that there was another man God had chosen. He had no protection in that position and was constantly harassed by an evil spirit. It made him very paranoid. He had outbursts of anger. He tried to, nail David at least 3 times with a javelin to the wall at dinner. It's like to go to dinner and then, the king picks up a javelin and tries to, impale you. That's a little tough invitation for dinner. But this was the problem. And and today, most rulers are like that. Um, they appeal to people, they appeal to like Saul appealed to the religious aspect of everything in Israel. But then as soon as he heard, which was incorrect, by the way, um, if you read Psalm 52, there's a guy by the name of Doeg. Doeg was not a Jew, okay? And what Doeg did was he saw David go to Amalek the priest at Nob and then talk to him. And then Doeg basically told Saul. Now Saul called the priests, and there were 70 of them, and they came up to see him and they said, Saul, what's up? And he said, so you're helping David? And he goes, what are you talking about? Like he's your captain. And they had no idea what was going on, but Saul got so frustrated because he wasn't getting the answers and he was paranoid, thinking that they weren't telling him and they were hiding something from him, that he commanded the Israeli army to kill the priests. This is the priests of God. There's 70 priests, right? So, but they were afraid. They had the fear of the Lord, so they wouldn't do it. And then Doeg said, I'll take care of that. So Doeg and his men, you know, he ended up killing them because he had no fear of God. He was as evil as Saul. And I mean, this couldn't get any worse, but that's what Saul did. He had no use for the priests unless the priests were no different than anybody else, because in Saul's eyes, life was horizontal. He never looked up. He only looked horizontally. And if, we see that in the culture today. People have been driven to the place where they're so insecure, they have to either get a whole bunch of likes and supports on social media, or they feel insignificant, or they need to have people tell them that they're okay. And some of these people with some um, really bad lifestyles that are not biblical, they need others to tell them that, to reinforce you're okay. You're okay. You keep living like you are, or you keep believing what you do. You're okay. And if anybody says otherwise, we'll have a law that puts them in jail or fines them or does something. So basically, we're going to force people to say something that they don't mean. How is that meaningful? I mean, you couldn't even make this stuff up. If you made a movie on how the current culture is today, nobody would watch it because they'd say, that stuff's not even plausible. If you made a movie over what was happening the past 4 years in the last administration, nobody would watch the movie. They'd say, no, that stuff isn't even possible. But then it all comes out that that's what was going on. And I mean, you couldn't even make it up for a movie, you know? Just kind of crazy stuff. Anyways, religious Babylon. Let's see. Verse 18. Who is the woman? It's better to see the woman to be the whole anti-Christian religious system of the future that will be bent on seducing the world's population away from the true religion. The many Old Testament allusions to Babylon in Revelation 17 and 18 indicate her tie to a certain geographical city, yet her primary function is not political but religious. She stands for an ideology associated with the political institution of the beast. Of the many connections between Revelation 17 and 18, the Old Testament passages on Babylon, the following are typical, and then there's a number of them there you can look up. Finally, Thomas says John's angel guide quite clearly alludes repeatedly to Babylon on the Euphrates throughout chapters 17 and 18. So the woman will be a religious system connected with that city, in other words, that particular city. So, continued, when the angel uses the present tense, is, it is not from the perspective of John's own time, but the time when the false Christ will have attained his ascendancy. So now that's important because though it is in the present tense, it's not John's present because he's he's watching a vision of another time. Um, so the great city is Babylon in its religious sense. And again, the first quote is referenced from Lee, the second from Walvoord that Robert Thomas is quoting. Um, Referral of this expression to Jerusalem is flawed because Jerusalem never had a kingdom over all the kings of the earth. So some people try to make the religious Babylon Jerusalem. That just doesn't work. To refer to the name Babylon to Jerusalem is unprecedented. Jerusalem cannot possibly fit the picture of this final Babylon. That's just how Cease has talked about it. Rome was a city with a kingdom over the kings of the earth, but it was never the great city of commerce described in chapter 18, which is interesting. So Babylon can't be Rome. The suggestion that the great city is an ideal city without geographical location, which is Lenski's idea, falls short of the text's requirement that this be a real city at a certain spot on the earth, Cease's view. The only viable identification remaining is the conclusion already reached. It is Babylon on the Euphrates. It's an actual location, the original location. The Old Testament prophecies of Babylon's destruction in Isaiah 13 and Jeremiah 51 are yet unfulfilled and are awaiting the future day of the Lord for that fulfillment. Furthermore, Babylon on the Euphrates has a location that fits this description politically, geographically, and in all the qualities of uh, accessibility, um, commercial qualities of accessibility, commercial facilities, remoteness of interferences of the church and state, um, and yet centrality in regard to the trade of the whole world. So a lot to take in there, but just great, great insight. And I put it up there because I think it's correct. So we'll end here. We're at 40 minutes, and we'll con we'll continue on with the commercial Babylon, chapter 18, in our next time. So read ahead, and until then, may God richly bless you as you continue to study His Word.